Bilderbeck has calculated how long we have got until Martians take over the entire world.
I think ever since I was a young fan of science fiction movies, I've always been very interested in the concept of what happens when this planet is invaded. And you know, over the last 4 or 5 decades, Hollywood has invaded planet Earth dozens of times. But War of the Worlds, sort of touches a nerve in the sense that it really is about more than science fiction. It reflects a lot of our post 9/11 fears, but it also reflects another impulse that we really are human beings and we do come together to help each other survive, especially when we have a common enemy. Action. When I was growing up, I remember watching both in movie theaters and later on television films like The Earth versus the Flying Saucers, It Came from Outer Space, Invaders from Mars, This Island Earth, certainly the original George Pal version of War of the Worlds. And I always was very interested in the fact that these films came out in response to our fears about the Soviet Union and a possible nuclear war someday between America and the Soviets. And those films were analogous and very metaphorical and preyed on our fears of being attacked from another country. Also being attacked from the sky, nuclear missiles raining down on America. Now, in the shadow of 9/11, it felt that War of the Worlds had a special significance. I mean, this film, it touches mostly on how this much catastrophe can bring about that much healing. But, our world has gone through a lot of growing pains, and we're in a whole different mindset. So, for the most part, I think I made the picture because I thought that this story's time had come again. And I'll say Tom, and look at the side of your left. Right there, that's all I need. That's perfect.
Put it right on there, right?
Yeah.
Minority Report was a dream come true for me to be able to work with Steven Spielberg. I grew up watching his movies, studying his movies. I often tease him, I know your movies better than you do. But we'd finished Minority Report, and we sat there and we said, okay, so what are we going to do next together? And he mentioned 3 movies, and War of the Worlds was the third one, and we both looked at each other, and the lights went on, and we said, that's it. There was, tremendous excitement, and then that day we just put it together and said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to make this movie together. And then Steven's worked with David Koepp before, a great writer, and I've worked with David Koepp before. And the 3 of us just sat down in January and talked about the story. And I wanted to play a father in a movie and have, a character. I like the, blue-collar character. I lived in Jersey twice. And David Koepp just really rolled with that.
Actually, the first conversation we had, I remember I took a lot of notes as I was reading the book, and one of the things I did is I made a list of all the things I felt we should not have in the movie. And if we could agree on that, I thought it was a big step toward making the movie in a fresh way. Because alien invasion scenarios have been done before. We've seen the first War of the Worlds and a number of others. So we made a list of things that we wouldn't put in the movie. Things like no destructions of famous landmarks, no shots of Manhattan getting the shit kicked out of it, because enough already with that. No shots of generals standing around a large map pushing ships with big sticks into place. No TV news cameras, no news crews out photographing destruction and then being destroyed by it. And we just went through all of what we thought were the cliches of the genre and vowed not to do those, because what that left us with was trying something that was a truly first-person account, which is what the book is. I think the genius of Wells' book is he doesn't try to tell everything that's going on in the world. He sticks almost exclusively to his hero's experience and what happened to him and what it felt like from his point of view.
This isn't one of my movies where suburbia is invaded by benign, benevolent extraterrestrials. This is really more of a story, less about my own upbringing in suburbia and more about a kind of working class existence and how this kind of deadbeat dad, I hate to use that word, but he's a little bit negligent toward his kids. He's a divorced man. He hasn't seen his kids for 6, 7, 8 weeks since the last visit. And when his wife finally says, look, you're taking him for this weekend because I've got to go see my mother in Boston, this tremendous cataclysmic event happens, which is very informative, you know, as to who Tom Cruise's character really is.
Where's my son? Where's my son? Cool down, man.
The world is basically coming to an end, and what is he going to do? That challenge of a guy who has really only thought about himself, and now at this point he has to become that friend. He must become that parent, or they're not going to make it. It's you know, the story is, are they going to make it?
Robbie! Robbie!
Robbie, come down. Pass him the other way, Robbie. Come back.
You know, great science fiction has tremendous characters and is still relevant. You know, when the classic pieces of science fiction are still relevant because it hits universal human themes.
It is a cautionary tale, in a way. You know, we're far more dangerous to ourselves than the, you know, huge extraterrestrial invaders. It's quite profound. And therefore, what's in your heart and what's in your soul, and your family and your children, and being the best father or mother or brother or sister that you can be. That's what counts.
I think this film, like Close Encounters and Private Ryan, is very hyper-real. And I think that's where, if we play our cards right, it's going to have its most profound effect in affecting an audience, and truly perhaps unsettling an audience, in that it is being played for the hyper-reality. And then into this reality comes something that is beyond the imagination, that is, you know, very scary to look at, and certainly, you know, almost impossible to imagine. So we imagine it for you, and this movie's been a real trip for me. It's the first time I've really, you know, jumped with both eyes open and both feet directly in the center of a science fiction horror film.
Yeah? Yeah. Well, now let's try something that doesn't involve your 10-year-old sister joining the army. You got anything like that?
Why don't you just tell us the truth? Oh, you have no idea.
You can't handle the truth!
I love working with Tom Cruise. This is our second time working together after Minority Report, and having known each other for many, many years, just as friends, it's brought a whole new evolution in our relationship as director-actor, and also in our relationship as friends. That never changes. But, you know, he brings a real life to this character, and he brings tons of, oh, what if we did this, what if we did that? And that really fires me up and gets me thinking, and I think in a sense we just sort of spark each other.
I know, I can do that.
Can you heat your bike make it lighter?
More peanut butter.
That would make it
Yeah.
clean up. Yeah, again.
There is nothing better in this world than creating. And when you have the opportunity to create with Steven Spielberg, it's very exciting. He creates at a high velocity. You know, it's very fast, very accurate.
I need you back at 4 instead of 12. I got half a Korea coming in at noon.
I can't. I'm on a 12-hour blow. Call Tedesco.
Oh, come on. Tedesco can't move 40 containers in an hour. I need somebody who can do double picks.
I really wish I could help you, Sal.
I really wanted to look at somebody from a lower middle class perspective, you know, and also I knew it would be Tom Cruise. I wanted to try and work against his persona a little bit.
You know what your problem is, Ferrier?
I can think of a couple of women who'd be happy to tell you.
And so I started thinking about the sorts of roles he's played, and I thought, well, what if we took the characters that he'd played early in his career, say from All the Right Moves, even Top Gun, and what happened to those guys 20 years later when it didn't work out the way it was supposed to. I was thinking of approaching him like one of those characters in a Springsteen song who got married too young and got a job he hated and just got stuck in this go-nowhere life that was making him miserable. I just thought that would be a fresh perspective, and then it would allow us to shoot interesting environments. You know, I wanted to have this sort of Rust Belt America look to the thing, and so I made him a dock worker so that we could, end up in these really industrial environments that would contrast our technological primitivism with the invaders' incredible technological advancement.
Well, I said to Tom when we first started working on this project, I said, Tom, I really want to make a movie where your character isn't the hero, but he's running away. And his larger agenda is, how do I keep my kids safe? And Tom was really game for that. I mean, he was excited that he didn't have to, put on an army helmet and go to war. The only war that he was going to fight was, the war to, keep his family safe.
Just like this is your area, Rachel. You are safe in this area.
Do it again, but overlap him, Rachel. Overlap him this time. Cut him off.
I feel that he sort of emerges forth, sort of out of this humdrum, day-to-day sort of empty existence, and that he ends up being this tremendous hero, I think, and how to do that with costumes without it being over-fashiony or, that it could be a normal, regular guy. So probably the most important piece of costume in the film is the jacket, so the jacket which Ray wears. And there was an original jacket, which was a Honda jacket, probably from the 60s, which came from a man I knew who lent me that jacket, and I used that as a sort of base. And then his was black, and I didn't want to do black. I wanted to do something more interesting because I think black is used quite a lot in leather on film, and I just wanted a different kind of mood. So I chose this sort of slightly eggplanty, aubergine-y kind of brown, and we made in excess of 60 altogether. So it was a big production, but I think the jacket takes the lead, and then everything else is, he has 2 T-shirts layered on top of each other, and then he has a hoodie and jeans, and then he slowly peels off his sweatshirt and one of his T-shirts, and then that's a sort of reveal down, and then you get more to the feeling of the body coming through. So that's what I feel is about the emergence of the hero.
It's like the on the Weather Channel, they say go down to the basement, there's a tornado, and it's for safety. It's like that.
There's gonna be tornadoes?
Dakota Fanning was on my mind the second I decided to make War of the Worlds, because I had already indirectly worked with her when I produced Taken, and then she had done Cat in the Hat for Universal and DreamWorks, and then she was on her way to making a feature for DreamWorks called Dreamer, and so it was just bound to happen. Ask him where he's going so I can get that next line out.
Sure, yeah, I'll just do it right, yeah.
And I think Dakota Fanning is the best juvenile actor working today. I know no one her age today who's better than she is, and more intuitive about human nature. I mean, she thinks with an adult's heart, and her character is, in certain instances, a little wiser than her own father, and that made for some interesting interplay.
What?
That's not how you're gonna get through to him. You want him to listen to you.
What are you? Your mother? Or mine?
To work with Steven Spielberg and Tom Cruise in the same movie, and Tim Robbins and everybody. It's just, I can't actually believe that I'm actually working with these, legends.
Can I see it? Let her play this coming game. See? See? Yeah. Don't let her, Dakota, don't let her touch your wrist again. Where'd you get it? Yeah.
This movie is unlike anything I've ever really done before. It's action and, special effects and everything. And so I've never really done this kind, and it was really exciting for me to get to do this kind of movie with Steven and Tom, and I've really learned a lot from them about this genre of films.
It's okay. You're fine.
It hit right behind our house!
I know, but it's not going to hit there again, okay? Because you see, lightning doesn't strike in the same...
Dakota Fanning is enormously talented. Just innately just talented and very bright. Fun to be with, too. I'm a father, and I've always loved kids. I was a camp counselor growing up, always wanted to be a father. And I believe that you don't talk down to children. You involve them in, they're human beings.
Every time a guy goes in there, give me a scream, okay?
Talking to Dakota, she's just so much fun.
Right in my ear.
Both of us worked so well together.
So Rachel, I thought she was just sort of archetypally sort of perfect, girly girl. I made her a camouflage vest, but it's in pink. It's an early, totally unconscious preparation for war. But she's really the barometer because she's the brightest. So you see the change on her the most because she starts so perky and then she becomes absolutely trashed.
My character is very much of a worrier and kind of hysterical. And so I have my little horse right here for comforting purposes. And so anytime my character gets worried, she's always clutching to her horse, which we've named Wilson.
We nickname it Wilson, you know, after Wilson the Ball in Castaway, because it was such an emotional attachment, so it was always known as Wilson.
A little bit longer this time. The back window too, like that. The back window too.
Justin, very talented, and came on, and I thought it was beautifully cast.
Is he starting there?
Yeah.
He's starting there.
I looked a long time for somebody to play Tom's son, but when I met Justin, he came in, he tested for us a number of times. I liked how natural he was, how American he was, even though he's actually Canadian, but he has this sort of American teenage, you know, voice. He's in the rhythm of the times today.
Yeah, I just gotta type it up.
Bullshit.
Yeah? What do you know?
And so there was a lot of different factors that concluded that Justin get that part, not the least of which he's a very talented new young actor.
Well, the first thing was like, I started, you know, trying to piece together who Robbie was in relation to his father. I just went by the library and I was looking through different books and just grabbing anything that caught my eye off the shelf. And I saw this book on 9/11 and all those photos that were there with the people covered in ash and the, you know, the apocalyptic world and state that everyone was in and how it unified everyone in New York at that time. And it was so similar, and I told Stephen that, and Stephen was like, yeah, I have all those photos up all over my office, you know. And I was like, wow, yeah, you know, so it's a similar thing, you know, what happened at 9/11 and how it unified everyone to be one instead of be all against each other and hate each other, you know.
Robbie is about style of youth, you know. He had that sloppy, sort of faddy thing going on, and I suppose in a way I wanted him to be the kind of quietest. So tonally he doesn't change that much, but the one really linking thing between Ray and Robbie is the hats, but they're supporting different teams, so it's part of this rivalry between them, and that Robbie would come to the house wearing his hat to piss his dad off.
Boston. That's how it is? Is that how it's gonna be?
We'll be at my parents' house in Boston. But don't call the house line, you know. Well, the point is I've got my cell phone, so if anything comes up or you have any questions, just call me.
Believe it or not, I can't handle it.
I'm a fan of Miranda's. She's a wonderful, wonderful actress, and I've seen her in a number of films. My kids are fans of hers from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, certainly. And so, you know, I just thought she was a good fit with the Tom Cruise character. And I thought she was a good fit because I thought that Tom may be married up, that he was this blue-collar worker. You know, he's a big kid at heart. And he probably, you know, he's a sexy guy, and he probably married up. He probably married a Connecticut aristocrat, and they fell in love and had a couple of kids. And yet there was such a great chasm between their upbringings that they never really could see eye to eye on many things. Or maybe she wanted him to be more involved in the family, and he was too much of a kid himself to do that, and the marriage failed. But there's a sort of sweet gap between Ray and Marianne, and I kind of thought Miranda did a great job playing a well-educated woman of good upbringing. And she was not slumming to be with Ray because he's this sexy dock worker. He's Tom Cruise after all. But she's found something in Ray she loved, but she also was holding on to this other lifestyle. And I thought that contrast was great.
I was in LA and I was in a car rental place and my agent rang me and I didn't even know that I'd been put up for it. I was in LA for a week for something else that I had to finish off. And my manager rang and she said, I need to talk to you. And I said, oh, can I call you back because I'm just hiring a car? And she said, no, I have to talk to you now. And she said that Steven Spielberg wanted to talk to me about coming to do this. And it was completely out of the blue for me. And I got to speak to him the next day and he asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. But the funny thing is that I'm actually pregnant myself, and so I had to say to him on the phone, I don't know if I can do this because I'm pregnant. I don't know if that's going to be a problem for you. And he said, oh, no, actually I like that. That's a good idea. Let's do that. And I'm not actually this pregnant. They've made me a little bit more pregnant than what I am.
What's happening? I can't tell you now. We've only got about another minute.
Next to the screenplay, there's nothing more important than the proper casting. You're offering the audience people to bond with, to identify with. And one of the things that I love about War of the Worlds is it doesn't have a complexity. If anything's complex, it's the characters.
The notion of the tripods being buried in pods underground was Stephen's, and I think that when you're working in a genre that's been well explored for decades, you just don't want to do what everybody else has done. And I think he just probably was thinking, well, they always come from space, so he just said, well, what if I go the other way? What if they come from underground? And then you work with it from there. A lot of times, a lot of your thinking starts with, what if I go the other way?
I want to show you this interesting thing.
Well, Stephen definitely had a few things in mind when he came to me with the brief, and it was, the 3 legs, definitely, that it has to be a tripod, and it has to be able to do certain things. There were certain things in the script, and most importantly, first, was to look scary.
I wanted the tripods, number one, to be really scary, because they're going to represent what's driving them. And so I wanted the tripods themselves, I want the audience to say, okay, it's just a machine, let's get to what's inside, let's see the aliens. I wanted the audience to actually be terrified by what these things look like from the outside. So I had the most amazing group of computer graphic artists working on the design of the tripods.
And we went back and researched all of the wealth of design interpretations that have been done to date. And part of it was to be conscious of what had been done, but also to steer away from that because we wanted to create something new and unique. And one of the great things that Stephen wanted to do was to create something that was iconic, but yet still paid homage and tribute to the original story. And so the whole idea of 3-legged was wonderful because then you had to start thinking about, well, why did they make it 3-legged? And so we had to think about different biology, different physiology of why they would perhaps make it like that, because obviously for us, we're sort of bipeds and quadrupeds. And then once you kind of do that homework, then it's really a matter of designing something aesthetically pleasing that looks and addresses sort of what the story needs are. And so in some ways, working closely with ILM, we would do some design, they would do some designs, it would dovetail together. Stephen would basically give us feedback on what works and what doesn't, and then we'd go back and we'd do our own interpretation, and it just kept going and going and being refined.
The original ideas that we had discussed about was that the tripods were pretty much mechanical, and they are mechanical. They're not a living thing at all. But as we got into it, started animating them and looking at them, they become a little more lifelike in their movements.
I remember seeing the designs of the tripod and going, wow, it looks like a Sherman tank atop these long, spindly, flowing legs, and picturing it in movement, these legs in a graceful flow, it's almost like watching a giraffe, and you're not realizing how much ground it's actually covering because you're hypnotized by this wonderful motion. And then contrast that with, it could be lethal at the drop of a hat, with the tentacles and everything. So I thought it was a wonderful character in that sense.
The lights coming off of it, the size certainly was all from the book, and we just took it there as a starting point and really made it able to act and react with its environment and with the human actors, basically.
The tripods had 3 legs, and so 3s are a guideline for how we were designing most of the things. So there were like 3 eyes, 3 limbs, 3 fingers. And the aliens, of course, were 3-limbed, or just some odd, configuration. And it really made it compelling because just the fact that you have 3 legs dictated a different kind of movement and a different kind of form. So the tripods in themselves, I think, will become very iconic in terms of what the aliens are. Just the fact that there are 3 symbolizes the difference between our culture and theirs.
It has a kind of terrestrial buoyancy in the sense that it is walking on the Earth and there are laws of gravity, but yet it has this kind of flow to it that is essentially aquatic. And there's a lot of aquatic characteristics of the tripod, such as it's almost like a jellyfish atop, the long legs underneath. It has the tentacles of like a squid or an octopus. So all these things, again, it's on the land, but it has aquatic characteristics.
Stephen kept saying these things move like really scary ballet dancers. So interesting, like you don't normally think of a monster moving like a ballet dancer, and that dichotomy gave me something to push off of and kind of, shape the way the design went.
What we did is we took the animatic model and we started doing some development. This is sort of putting the tripod through its paces, deciding what the range of motion would be, and really finding sort of the bookends for what Stephen was looking for. And you can see on the legs, we really had to decide how bendy they would be, what started to look almost too animated and not heavy enough. The next step is then to rig the character. And what you see here is all of these colored controllers. The animators will move over time to animate.
The animation on this is pretty important to give a sense of sort of amazement and danger and humbleness to these creatures. Like there's nothing you can do, they're in control. That's pretty neat that comes across in the film, and Randy's been really good at getting that in the animation and all.
Yeah, this is actually the walk that Stephen really liked. He felt that there was a sense of weight and heaviness to this, and also a nice organic sort of fluid motion to it. We did go a little more towards creature-like look.
The birds, that was an idea that I heard from Stephen, which I thought was wonderful, that there was, that all these birds kind of were following these war machines because they symbolized death and they were creating death. And so these black birds were almost like vultures, scavengers, and so they foreshadowed the images of death. And I thought it was a wonderful way of doing all of that, but yet still getting a sense of drama, because you don't know if these birds are going to the danger or away from danger and whether you should follow or run away. And it was just great because in an image, it sort of strikes fear in you without really knowing why, but you're reacting to it.
Look at the goddamn birds!
The moment when the war machines actually die in the movie is one of those iconic images that I grew up with. I love seeing those things. And I think it's one of those wonderful images because it reinforces that you don't have to change our reality much to make it fantastic. And by introducing these gigantic war machines half crashed into a building, kind of automatically gives you a very stunning icon. And so, there are many ways to do it. And of course, I think it's always best to go with the simplest, which is to have the machine there and then just treat it with real careful lighting, real careful staging. So it becomes a very surreal moment where you're seeing this very horrific thing, but yet it was an image that gave hope, hope for humanity.
When we first started developing E.T., it was a much edgier, darker story that we were telling, and it actually evolved into something that was more benign.
Well, Martians is not mentioned in my film because my aliens don't come from Mars. Our aliens come probably from as far away as E.T. came from, except they came from a darker part of the universe, whereas E.T. came from a rather benevolent planet.
The aliens have gone rogue, They're rogue alien. It's E.T., man, but he's gone bad, E.T.'s gone bad, he's rogue.
I don't try to psychoanalyze what is on the aliens' minds, except that they're bent on our total extermination. They just want to eliminate us from existence, and they probably have plans for our planet themselves. But we don't go into what's their motivation. We just basically experience the result of these nefarious plans to supplant us with themselves.
They're malevolent. You do not want to run into these aliens.
we must have had 20, 30 designs on aliens, from the sublime to the ridiculous.
You know, Steven said that, you know, these aliens grew up perhaps in the zero-G environment, so there's really no up and down. But yet we had to make them so that they looked intelligent. They're not just beasts.
They were these rangy designs that I felt kind of had amphibian characteristics because there was a slight sheen or wetness to the skin.
This is one of the first reference images that we had, and we all kind of got together to discuss around this piece. You can see the reflective eyes inside there. This was when we got our kind of first glimpse at how alien this alien was really going to be. You can notice it's got an extra joint in the arms, 3 legs as expected, these odd little flippers that are there, vestigial limbs, something like that. And we all just kind of went from there, got together, and discussed what it was going to be. And so this is the first turntable sculpt that we did. The model is done by Frank Gravatt, and this is to match the reference photos. But this was where Frank took it, and it's just a really wonderful sculpt.
And the way that I saw them moving was almost like a tree frog when it walks. Not when it's jumping, but when it walks, it has this kind of gait where it's always kind of in contact with the ground. And it was kind of stealthy, so it was almost a cross between a frog and the stealth of a cat. And so when the aliens were moving, we tried to keep it very creepy and eerie, coming in and out of pools of light and using their hands like to place on the wall to go through spaces. And as you see one hand touch the wall, you see the other hand, and then there's a surprise, the third leg comes through. So it's always kind of, again, revealing things about these creatures. You don't get it all at once.
For that, we spoke with Randy and with Dennis, and we went over a number of behaviors and things like that, looking at it saying, okay, is it more reptilian? Is it more human-like? Things like that. And what we came upon was it's primarily reptilian influence, so it moves in a very lithe, kind of slow but precise fashion. And we were very sure to push that it's curious. That was the main drive behind it, is whenever it moved and behaved, it was always going to be looking and curious. And these are some early facial sculpt tests that Frank did. So this is the character looking left and right. And then here are a number of the facial expressions. So we started out just going through a large variety of it. There's a shot where it has to lick a photograph, and another shot where it's drinking from some water. So we were very sure that we needed to have a good, interesting tongue shape, recognizable, but at the same time still very alien. As you can also see, the eyes kind of bulge a little bit. So this is part of where we were giving a lot of different variety and opportunity to the animators and to really drive the personality of it there.
In the cellar sequence with the aliens, there was a full-size styrofoam carved stand-in for the alien, which we use after a shot was done. We run it through the paces with the same camera setup and lights so that we would have that reference for lighting and TDing the eventual animation.
The statue, the Minuteman statue, was a real key image. You know, Steven really wanted to show, you know, how this alien weed and this aliens have sort of encompassed everything. You know, all of our images, all of our icons, and so that was a key moment where you actually saw something very familiar enveloped in this, and it was very symbolic of what the aliens were trying to do. And so it was an important image to try to get because, you know, even though it's kind of played in the background, you know, you understand what happened.
It's quite extraordinary when you consider the era that H.G. was writing the original story, for him to come up with the solution of it being the common cold that kills off the alien invasion. Here's a thing which, if science could, it would eliminate the common cold. And what Wells is saying by using that as the, the ultimate denouement is everything in our world, all of the environment is related, and every part of it is necessary. So if we had managed to kill off the common cold, well, the aliens would have killed us. And for someone to have written that back at the end of the 19th century is quite extraordinarily prescient.
Despite all of man's technology and all of our courage and all of our hopefulness, what really saves us in the end are the most microscopic creatures alive on this planet today. And that was something I didn't want to lose.
The idea of bacteria destroying them when all our weapons failed is just a great irony. That which we take lightly and attempt to stamp out and never even think about and can't even see is much more powerful than our greatest weaponry. And the idea that nature in some way knows a hell of a lot more than we do, I think is an idea that will last forever.
We've been essentially in post-production since week 6 of the shoot. We've essentially been turning over elements to sound effects. There's an incredible amount of sound design work that's required to develop these characters, not just visually, but how they sound. That's been going on for several months now, and we've been turning over materials to John Williams. And we start scoring the beginning of May, and the dubbing process will continue for the whole month of May, right up to the last minute.
This is the first movie I've ever done with John Williams where John did not get to see the picture before he began writing the music. This has never happened to us before. John is writing the music in a semi-vacuum. When he first sat down to watch the movie, I only had 6 to 12 reels complete. So he could only see 6 reels. So he saw 60 minutes of the movie and began writing. He never saw the last 60 minutes of the movie. But he said that he had enough of an experience in the first 60 minutes that he knew exactly how to write it. But I'll be absolutely blown away when I hear the first note, because I have no preconceptions of what the music's going to be like. Except John keeps reassuring me it's going to be really different than anything he's done before.
It is true that Stephen's other space epics are all very warm and welcoming in terms of the visitors. That really is a change for him, to go on War of the Worlds, where you have these machines coming that bring the aliens here that are so destructive. An interesting deviation for Stephen. And so it creates a different musical opportunity and a different role for the orchestra and for the music. And there are a few sections in there, a few cuts to the alien machines, where the orchestra does a grand gesture of the classic monster film. But we just sort of doff our cap to give a little referential nod to the genre. But I think, for example, the intersection scene where the alien machine first emerges is, I think, one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. And especially where we first have the bodies being evaporated, I guess you could say, by the strike of the aliens. We have orchestral gestures and sound effects, but some of them also have a women's chorus. There are women making a kind of a glissando that goes up, almost like a shriek. The addition of something human, even though we don't exactly know that it's a women's chorus, gives us some feeling here that just a zap doesn't quite have. So you recognize some pain in it, even though the victims are not privileged enough even to say ouch. They're gone before they can say that. And it happens again at the end of the ferry sequence, when people are plucked out of the water. Again, the orchestra and percussion will do effects, but for one or two of them, we have also the women. Humanizing the experience, so to speak.
Maybe you'll be okay. Maybe you'll get lucky and they'll train you as their pet. Feed you, train you how to do tricks. You shut up and listen!
There are some male voices in some sections of the basement, because we have some very interesting sound effects for the probe and also for the aliens themselves. But if you dig really deeply into that soundtrack and music track, there are men singing in that. It's even below the Russian bass. It goes into almost a register of Tibetan monks, which is the lowest kind of pitch that our bodies are able to make. And we have a group of the men doing that very, very softly. film begins musically with an electronically assembled group of sounds that I put on paper. I would just write it like you would write an orchestra score, describing what I think the sounds can be. And then we would, with synthesizer, develop those sounds and put it together step by step. Only two places, the beginning, which accompanies the Morgan Freeman narration.
No one would have believed in the early years of the 21st century that our world was being watched by intelligences greater than our own.
And equally at the end of the film, the end of the Boston street, and the camera proceeds along the limb of, we think, a dead tree. And one of the buds in the tree is alive, and we see that the life is there. And you hear the cyclically closing, again, Morgan Freeman's voice. And again, the orchestra sort of morphs into electronics.
For neither do men live nor die in vain.
Get in with us.
I'm not fooling around. I got a busy day ahead of me.
Close it.
The role of the music and the role of the orchestra, really, as they begin to drive away from the city, is to provide a propulsion that is pulling us forward and helping us to try to escape, although there isn't any escape.
You saw we're under attack!
And the orchestra has the same primary function in what is a fantastic scene, I think, the ferry scene. What the orchestra can do is provide this driving beat, a propulsion, a pulse that sometimes we hear, sometimes we don't hear, but it's always there and we can feel it. And when there's room for it to come forward and push us forward, we will do that. It's probably the most complicated sequence, which could point to the sort of cooperation between editing, in this case Michael Kahn and myself. Stephen is always kind of in the middle and hovering between the two. The music will do this and the editing will do that and make his suggestions. But that is a very interesting scene. certainly a very memorable image, is when Ray's character comes out of the destroyed house and he sees the crashed plane there. And that music was not intended to be there. That music was part of what I call the epilogue, which comes at the very end of the end credit of the film. And Stephen came and he said, you know, the trumpet trio, where the trumpets are playing. Yes, well, it's the beginning and the middle of that epilogue. He said, how do you think it would be for when Ray comes out and he sees the plane? But I thought it was an inspired idea, actually, to put that epilogue, which I wrote for some other purpose, that I hadn't expected to go there. I thought it was a wonderful solution to that moment.
It's out here.
It's not the first time he's done that. I mean, he has a very, very good suggestion of what to go where, so that the working relationship is comfortable and it's fun, but I have to think also probably at some level more efficient.
It's very strong.
Uh-huh.
And Rachel screams, and I don't know what the sound is going to be for the other thing, but I may be a hair early. Maybe the screen should lead it.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure about
Maybe
it.
the scream should lead the music coming in, you mean?
Possibly.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we'll know that you get everything up.
Right, right.
But I'm a little. You're going to see it's probably a hair early. It's with the light.
Right.
And we see the light is over on the left side of
Yes.
the screen above, and
Yes.
we start right on that as
Yes.
though the sound effect were there, and then she screams. you
Right.
know.
I think that'd be kind of interesting.
So.
It precedes it, in
Yeah.
other words.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but you know, because it's easy to slide it.
That sounds good, though.
And I feel the beneficiary of something very special. In my case with Steve, is also working with a great friend, you know, just like a family member.
I think if you were to look at this as a trilogy of work by Stephen, going from Close Encounters to E.T. and now War of the Worlds, I think inherent in that story, inherent in the idea of something unknown coming from outer space and what our reaction would be to that, I think that the edgier, darker story has always kind of been somewhere in there, and now he's telling that story.
What do you need? Well, when you take the coat, you put it in the car.
We got no
You're going to start the engine. You're going to back up. You're going to drive out. You're going to pick up Robbie first. Okay. You're back. So we're going to fix him and show you. Oh, stop the musician.
I just personally like hanging out with Stephen. I just enjoy hanging out with him. And we just laugh together and we create together, and it's fun. And really, I love that about him. You know, as an actor, it's fun to be part of that, and as someone who loves movies, to see him create on that level, and the team that we had was excellent.
You know, I think childhood impressions are the thing that stay with you the rest of your life. Those are the things that never go away. You'll learn and forget things in your adult years, but you'll never forget your childhood, and you'll never forget some of the seminal moments you've had with your parents. And that moment where my dad took me out and showed me a meteor shower, the Perseus meteor shower, and I'd never seen a meteor shower before, and the first time he got me my first reflecting telescope that he handmade from a little tube that had a carpet wrapped around it before he took it and ground to glass and actually made this thing, made all the optics himself. And I think in that sense, my dad gave me the greatest gift next to the gift of life that he and my mom gave me. He gave me an opportunity to apply my imagination to things that he first introduced me to, like the sky, like the stars, like the mystery of what's out there, and like the certainty that we are not alone.
Everybody down!
It was so special being able to bring the two actors back from the George Pal, Byron Haskin 1953 War of the Worlds. And I was a big fan of Gene Barry when I worked with him. I think the second or third thing I ever directed in my life was this Name of the Game episode starring Gene Barry. And it was a science fiction episode, a real departure from the normal series. And I worked with Gene on that. And so I think Gene was rather surprised to get a call from me saying, hey, can you come back and just do a cameo, because I'm not really remaking your 1953 War of the Worlds, but there are many homages to that original film in my, updated version of the H.G. Wells book. And can you come in with Ann Robinson and do a quick cameo? And he was happy to do it, and Ann was thrilled as well.
Meteor is either very light, which is unheard of, or else it's hollow somehow. If it were heavy and solid, it would have made a tremendous crater when it landed.
As I look back at my original performance in War of the Worlds, I was new in the motion picture industry. I had come from the Broadway theater, and I was under contract to Paramount Pictures. I think I had done one movie for them, and they said, we want Gene Barry to do the role in War of the Worlds. It was a wow, you know what I mean? And so I just went into it and did it, and I've lived with it for 50-some-odd years since, and pleased. And now here I am commemorating that fact, plus the fact that Steven Spielberg is doing War of the Worlds. It's a big moment in my life. So here I am.
You can't imagine how overwhelmed I was when I found out that he wanted me to be in his movie. I just thought it was thrilling. Everybody had always asked me, I think you'll have a cameo, do you think you'll be in it? And I said, I don't know, but keep our fingers crossed, and sure enough, my wish came true.
Ann Robinson, she was so divine. First of all, she came to her fitting with the ring that she'd been given by her dad when she started filming the original War of the Worlds. And then she told me that Edith Head, who designed the film's costumes, who's the greatest costume designer ever, she never met her. And that she'd gone out shopping to May and Company with an assistant, and they bought 2 suits. And those suits serviced the whole film. So I thought it was just incredibly amusing. We were just manufacturing thousands of costumes, where they made do with just 2.
I was quite young, had never read the novel. I was a contract player. Gene Barry was also a contract player, but he was in a much higher category than I was at the time. And to be able to be chosen by George Pal, whom I'd grown up with, watching the Puppetoons, was quite a thrill. I mean, Destination Moon and When Worlds Collide and everything else he'd ever made. I mean, he was a brilliant, brilliant artist, and it was a thrill. I knew it was going to be a fabulous movie. And Byron Haskin was a lovely director, lovely man. He had been a special effects person, I do believe, and that's why he was chosen to be director. And I'm sure George Pal, his influence is there quite heavily. And also, I imagine Cecil B. DeMille, because he owned it in the first place. He owned the rights to War of the Worlds. And because of Cecil B. DeMille's fondness to George Pal, he allowed him to do it.
I was a kid living outside of Los Angeles. I was probably about 10 or 12, and I'd seen the movie and thought it was amazing, and I was wondering how this movie, War of the Worlds, was made. And my mother knew an electrician who had worked at Paramount Studios, so I called him up one night, and he had worked on the movie, years before, and talked to me about it and everything, and it was quite a connection to understand that somebody had actually worked on it, and he talked about the war machines and the Martian character in it, and the shooting of it, and it just made it seem all very tangible, that you could actually make a movie like that.
Well, after we were finished filming, and I was under contract at the studio, so I was able to stick around and watch everything, and on Stage 18, they had all these marvelous models built, and they were enormous. They were all made of copper, and they were over 1 meter wide, floating silently across the soundstage, all 3 of them. Some man was sitting there with levers, controlling them all. And they would light up with the green lights coming out of the tips. And the art director, he's the one who thought of the Cobra head. He said he saw a Zenith record player one time as it moved ominously across the records with the hood on top of it, disguising the needle. He said that looked very devastatingly frightening. So he put that in as the Cobra head. It wasn't designed after a cobra. It was designed after a Zenith record player.
When I first got to meet Anne, we began talking. I said, Anne, you know, I did a real homage to you. I don't know if you realize this, but did you see E.T.? She said, of course, darling. And I said, well, remember the scene in E.T. where Elliot's looking out the window, he feels something strange in his heart because he's kind of feeling E.T.'s feelings, and suddenly E.T.'s hand comes in and just rests itself on Elliot's left shoulder. And I said, that was you and the Martian in War of the Worlds.
Charlie Gomorrah, he and his daughter made that Martian the night before. They first had a much taller one, and George Pell said, no, it's far too large. Go back and make another one. We have to shoot tomorrow. So he and his daughter, who was only 12 at the time, they worked all night long on this. But they didn't have time to make the arms fit the size of the new body. So that's why the Martian arms in the motion picture are so extremely long.
Across the gulf of space on the planet Mars, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded our Earth with envious eyes, slowly and surely drawing their plans against us.
So many people that I speak to who have studied the film, studied the book, they see far more into this movie than I did growing up watching it. There were so many nuances that I didn't understand at the time, that with maturity and with reading the book and other people's discussions, you begin to realize what he really had in mind, all the hidden meanings.
But they seem to murder everything that moves.
If they're mortal, they must have mortal weaknesses. They'll be stopped.
At the time, though, I looked at it as a great job, if you know what I mean. As a young actor, I thought, wow, and I did it, and I was tremendously involved and pleased. And Steven is an outstanding director, and I've known him for many years, and I am pleased that I'm involved on this version. It's a redo of my life in a sense, you know, a recap.
Today, I am shooting the last scene of the movie, which is going to be thrilling, because all my friends are going to sit there all through the movie and wonder where Anne is, and she'll pop up at the very end.
Beautiful. One more time. Very nice. One more time. Resetting. Resetting.
The grandson of H.G. Wells, the great-grandson of H.G. Wells.
Right. We didn't bring the children, but we could have great-great-grandchildren.
I never knew him terribly well because I was 11 when the war broke out in Europe, and the old man rather bloody-mindedly insisted on living in London, and you didn't take grandchildren to visit grandfather because the place was being fairly consistently bombed. But the old man lived until I was about 15, 16. I met him a few times when I was small. He used to give marvelous birthday parties on his birthday because he could never remember the dates of the birthdays of his grandchildren. So grandfather's birthday was when you got the bicycle, the train set, all the things that you really hoped for. But I think in a way the most interesting thing was how he pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He was more or less self-educated to start with. They tried to get him to do respectable things. They tried to apprentice him to a draper's and later to a pharmacist, and he flunked out on both of those. He then got a curious job as a sort of pupil teacher, and eventually he got a scholarship to go to London University, which was really the sort of making of him because he came out with first-class degree in zoology. And if you think about it, most of his early novels, the ones that he really made his name about, Time Machine, Dr. Moreau, Invisible Man, they were all biological novels. So his big distinguishing feature was he was probably the first writer to cash in on a science education.
Well, if you took their DNA, it would match H.G. Wells' DNA. The DNA would be a perfect match.
The man H.G. Wells had such a fabulously complicated life, you couldn't sum it up in a quick statement. He had extraordinary sort of social views that he expressed in a lot of his later books, but had also in his early work had been, this sort of visionary creator of a whole new literary form. Science fiction really didn't exist apart from a few writers at the time, and was not known as science fiction per se, and he pretty much brought that to the world.
Well, one doesn't realise now, because this sort of alien invasion stuff is commonplace. But it wasn't in '98. It was an entirely novel idea.
And so, at the end of the 19th century, there was an enormous sort of burst of literacy in England, and a lot of magazines serialized stories. So H.G. actually published all of his novels as serials in a magazine first, and in the case of War of the Worlds, it came out in Pearson magazine, and was then turned into a book later. And when Wells wrote War of the Worlds, he was actually very much on an up and up. He'd written like 3 hugely successful novels prior to this. It's quite interesting that before Time Machine, he'd been nowhere. He'd been writing as a desperate attempt to do something to make a living, because he'd had to give up being a school teacher due to an injury that he had got. So writing was very much a fallback career for him, which had suddenly and very unexpectedly just blossomed. And so, yeah, War of the Worlds finds him a young man still, but he's a name that people look for. They're looking forward to his next publication.
I think it's interesting that a scientist allowed himself to have an imagination, because, most scientists just work from absolutes, and they don't allow themselves to go, beyond the known universe. But I think what helped him was, I think he was a philosopher. I think he was a philosopher/scientist. And there was a political climate that created enough anger in H.G. Wells that he was able to write this story in response to some of his frustration with British colonialism and other hot point issues of the day.
The thing that's extraordinary is not only was this a successful book, but then many, many years after it's first serialized and then published, it gets turned into a completely other medium, with Orson Welles in 1938 doing his legendary broadcast, where his theatre company had a regular broadcast, but they broke in to bring news reports of this alien landing that was going on. And quite literally, many people who tuned in to listen missed the introduction that explained that it was a dramatization, were quite panicked by this. Apparently H.G. was actually quite bothered by the irresponsible way in which Orson Welles had just kind of fomented panic in people across the States.
But later in life, he actually met and rather liked Orson Welles. They got on rather well together.
George Pal was a movie producer in Hollywood in the 50s and 60s who had a real love for H.G. Wells' writing. And in '53, he produced the movie version of War of the Worlds, and then went on also in 1960 to do the Time Machine.
They're trying to go across the Hudson, and these things have started to come at them. And they're tripods, just like the original book. We went with what Wells originally intended, which is to have the machines not be flying saucers, but be tripods.
I like the tripods in the pictures we saw.
Oh, good.
This has gone back to something much more authentic than the George Pal.
The George Pal version.
The George Pal ones
exactly.
I think H.G. would be enormously gratified to know that his novels are still current and that he's still actually published. But I think he would be astonished to realize that 100 years after he's written them, they're still being remade into new movies. It does speak to the kind of timelessness of the thematic material that's embodied in the stories.